Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bay Area Content Marketing Meetup. We're past summer, heading to Q4, and today we are going to be talking about how to avoid unprofitable market segments. We're joined by Chad Eckes, founder and principal of C Squared E. Today, Chad will equip you with the knowledge and tools to confidently identify and avoid unprofitable market segments. You'll gain actionable strategies, frameworks, and tools to segment markets effectively and learn techniques to pinpoint unattractive segments. Chad, thanks for joining and take it away.
Thanks, Dennis, and hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Chad Eckes. As Dennis said, I'm out of Minneapolis. I've been an independent go-to-market strategy consultant for the last 16 years. And this is the second time I've had the honor of doing a presentation for the Bay Area Content Marketing Meetup. So we'll get going here. What we're going to cover in the next 45 minutes is content focused on market segmentation. I'll start by going over some basic definitions of market segments and review the benefits of identifying attractive segments. We'll then go over some examples of companies that likely didn't do a really good job of targeting attractive segments, which resulted in them losing a bunch of money and wasting resources. I'll then cover the difference between structural and needs-based segmentation, and then provide some ideas on how you can determine good segments from bad ones. I'll also share a framework I've used to help determine attractive segments, as well as a way to build a scorecard to prioritize segments. I'm hoping to have time for Q&A at the end, but I would welcome anybody typing a question. I'll try to monitor the chat, and I'll probably pause a few times during the presentation just to check for questions as well. So before I get started, I'd also want to highlight some desired outcomes that I have for all of you today. I've geared this to be educational, and so hope that you'll walk away with these 4 capabilities, which then should help you and your teams and your organizations find the best market segments for your products or services. So quickly, I'll just list these out. 1, I want you all to be able to name 6 characteristics of a market segment. 2, describe the benefits of identifying attractive market segments. 3, differentiate between structural and needs-based segmentation. And then 4th, conduct a workshop with your team to evaluate and prioritize segments. So those are the things that I hope to be able to help you with today, and you'll walk away with those items. So let me begin and just level set so that everybody has my definition, at least, I think a pretty common universal definition of what a market segment truly is. I define a market segment as a specific group of customers with similar needs, purchase behaviors, and or identifying characteristics. I mean, simply put, it's a group of customers that have some things in common. So if that's a market segment, that's a group of customers with a few things in common. What is segmentation? Segmentation is the process or the action of partitioning markets into these groups of customers. And again, those customers should have similar needs and they should exhibit similar purchasing behavior. My takeaway for you here is that segmentation is an activity that you and your teams perform. It's an active endeavor that teams take on. Sometimes it's just a one-off project, but often it's ongoing. At least that's what I find to be best practice, meaning you should always be thinking about identifying good groups of target customers, segmenting, resegmenting, reassessing the market to see if those customers are still attractive. Now, why is that important? Because the goal of segmentation is to A, understand your customers' needs, and B, to help you develop plans for attracting, satisfying, and retaining those customers, which in turn gives you the best chance to have a profitable outcome for your product or service. So segmentation, it's a good idea. Hopefully we all agree with that. But how do you know what a market segment looks like? How do you know it when you see it? How do you know that group of customers is actually a market segment? So for that, I refer to these 6 characteristics of a market segment. If you can find all these things to be true, then you know that group of customers is a true market segment. And I'm going to walk through each of these, and then we're going to go through some examples. So a market segment should be identifiable, and that means distinctly different on easily measurable variables. For example, like iPhone versus Android users, or accounting firms versus law firms. So pretty obvious, observable things that makes them identifiable and different. Substantial means that the group is large enough to matter, right? You don't want to target a small group of customers or businesses because then you probably can't make enough money. So it needs to be large enough to matter. Accessible means that the group is reachable through marketing, advertising, distribution, sales. In other words, you can see these customers, you can find them somehow, whether that's they're walking on the street or they're surfing the web, or you go to a trade show or a conference and you can interact with them. Stable means that the group of customers persists over time. It's not like a group like a flash mob and then they're gone. It typically persists year over year, or usually over very long periods of time. So they're always there. Now, responsive means that those customers are likely to respond favorably to your efforts targeting them, your marketing efforts, and that would be because they're interested in the product, or they have the means to purchase it. So being interested is one thing, but having the money to purchase it is also important. And then lastly, actionable. And this means the unique attributes of the group lead to decisions that you'll make on pricing, product, distribution, and promotional strategies. So again, these are the 6 characteristics. And if a group of customers meets all 6 of these, then you have yourself a market segment. So I'd like to put these to the test, and I'm going to go through a little short quiz where we figure out whether a group of people or businesses is or is not a market segment. And I'm going to just make this interactive. I'm just going to call on some people here that are participating. I've got your names up, so hopefully you're willing to give this a shot. So I'm going to first call on Craig. Craig, how are you?
Fine.
Wonderful. What do you think? Are all the businesses in the US a market segment or not a segment?
Not a segment.
Right. Yeah, it's not very actionable, right? The group is just too broad. Elizabeth Hahn, are you there?
I am, sorry.
Great, yeah. What do you think? Yoga studio owners in the US, is that a segment or not a segment?
Oh, it's getting closer to one, but to me, it's still too broad.
Okay. Yeah, you can always debate these things. I happen to know a business that is targeting yoga studio owners in the US. There's about 27,000 of them, and they have already like 1,800 as customers. So for them, it's working. For some businesses, it might not be a tight enough segment. So totally agree. It can very much depend on what you're selling. Let's see. How about Mehdi? Mehdi, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right. How about yoga studio owners in rural Illinois? Do you think that's a segment or not?
I think it could be a segment.
Okay. And why would you say that? Give me a reason.
I think we could target the people in, as the yoga studio owners in rural Illinois. I think it could be very narrow, but with considering digital marketing tools, I can we target
Hmm.
this segment.
Yeah. No, you make a great case. When I put this together, and again, I might have a little inside information about how many rural Illinois yoga studios there are. It's not a very big number. So you
Yeah,
might not be targeting just rural Illinois studio owners, but it can depend. Like you said, targeting and reaching those businesses might not be that challenging. So you may still run campaigns or do some promotions to them. Um, Todd Cordo, are you with us?
Oh, I am here.
Excellent. What's your opinion on small businesses in rural Illinois? Is that a segment or not a segment?
Well, I could generate an email, the marketing list for small businesses in rural
Yeah.
Illinois, but I really have a hard time identifying commonality between the different types of businesses. I mean, is it B2B, B2C?
Right,
So,
right.
I'd have a difficult time calling that a segment.
Yeah, you nailed it, I think. Because while it is potentially a very large group of targets, small businesses, whatever you define small as, and a lot of them exist in rural, small towns in the state of Illinois, Dennis's home state now. Yeah, what differentiates them in terms of being able to reach out to them and know what their common pain points are. So yeah, this is definitely a, maybe not one. So then lastly, let's see, I'm going to pick on Dennis, our host, and see what he thinks about Illinois yoga enthusiasts aged 25 to 40 in the state of Illinois. Is that a segment or not a
It
segment?
it looks like it to me. I would answer based on what the number is, the number of people, but I think there's
Sure.
Yeah.
enough in there that it's a viable segment.
Yes. Yeah. I think I agree. If I said yoga enthusiasts in maybe Wyoming, maybe not. But even then, if you're a Wyoming-based yoga studio owner, then your target is Wyoming, yoga enthusiasts probably. So,
Yeah.
but this is great. You can see. I think hopefully we all understand that sometimes it might be a segment for one business or product, might not be for another. But you still need to
Also,
go back and look at those 6 criteria to really understand if you've got a segment or not.
if
Chad,
I could,
but
oh, go
just
ahead.
going, Chad, just a question though, but going
Yeah,
back to yoga studio owners in rural Illinois, I know on one hand that violates your, is it large enough? But
right.
if you're like, let's say I'm selling yoga mats, right? And I'm
Hmm.
making this up. If I have the ability to micro target and I understand that there's something even if it's 10 or 20 and I can efficiently do it, right? Like if I can't efficiently do it, it doesn't make sense to, but if I have a
Right.
way to micro segment, whether it's messaging or something like that, or even for whatever reason, yoga studio owners in rural Illinois prefer yoga mats with like images of corn on it. I'm totally stereotyping. I don't mean to offend anyone, but like, but if I have the ability, like I have a line, sort of like a rural line of yoga gear, right? And I have
Yep.
the ability to efficiently target it. Couldn't you make the argument though that that is a segment, albeit small, but I'm tailoring my message to that micro segment?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And it does kind of come down to is it big enough to matter? And that's relative to your business, right? Like if all you do is sell yoga mats and you're looking to make, you know, $100,000 in revenue a year, and you've got enough of a total addressable market in yoga studio owners in rural Illinois, then that can make you happy for sure. If you're
But
a
even as
large
a
retailer,
but even as a
if
larger, like even as a like if I'm selling yoga mats, nationally, right? It could be a subset. Now, mind you, if there's one if there's one yoga studio in like, yeah, it's not worth my time, right?
right.
But if there's 50 or 100, okay, maybe.
Yeah, it's going to be relative to the
Yep.
goals of your
Okay.
business, the
Thank you.
scale of your business. Because, like, if you've got great market share, but now the only market share left is rural parts of states, then you're gonna, figure out which states to go after first in those rural areas.
Well,
Thank you.
question
Um,
also, Chad, if you say microsegmentation, wouldn't that by definition not be a segment?
again, big enough to matter can be kind of relative, right? As we're
Not
sort of
very micro
discussing
then.
here. Well, yeah, again, if you're looking to generate just 100K in revenue and be happy with it, maybe that's, you can do that in rural Illinois. But I come from
Yeah,
firms like Accenture and 3M, where big enough to matter has to be, in the tens, if not hundreds of millions of total available or total
right.
addressable market. Um, and then certainly as, you go to market, you might micro segment, so to speak, to have specific marketing messages to, those very specific potential buyers. So this is great engagement. I'm glad we had this little quiz here. It got everybody thinking about this. Let me transition now to just talk about the benefits of segmentation, because it's probably obvious to most of you, but then I'll also get into some case studies of organizations that maybe didn't do segmentation well. So the benefits of segmentation quickly, first, it gives you focus. It gives the focus for the business to sell to and serve customers that matter the most. Typically in my experience, you're dealing with a decent sized total addressable market, and you have to figure out where to target first or where to take your limited resources. So segmentation benefits the organization in that way. It's also about, therefore, the corollary is avoiding wasteful use of resources so that you're not spraying and praying, so to speak. Again, you want to develop targeted pricing and targeted marketing campaigns that are more likely to reach that audience and generate that positive response. It's also easier when you're segmenting to uncover unmet needs or gaps in the market within specific segments. You can really learn from that segment a lot quicker, and that powers the development of your products, your features, your services. Segmenting the customer base also allows the business to tailor its sales approach or its marketing approach, because you understand the customer buying behaviors and pain points and decision-making processes better. It also helps customer service, right? It helps marketing, helps sales, helps customer service, because they now have better training on the specific needs and preferences of customers. And then last one I have here is that if you're properly segmenting the market, you're not only going to identify attractive segments, but you're necessarily discovering bad segments, or you're ruling out segments that would likely be unprofitable. So, like I said, I've got a few case studies here of what maybe unprofitable market segmentation looked like. So I've got some examples from the past. Some of you may have heard of these before, but I'll go through them. So many of you may remember the story of IBM Watson Health, which was a technology and service group touted by IBM as could be a revolution for healthcare, AI and healthcare. IBM established this business back in April of 2015, and it announced partnerships with like Apple, Medtronic, J&J, a lot of big companies. But IBM didn't choose to focus Watson Health on one particular corner of the healthcare ecosystem. They wanted to serve pharma and healthcare providers and insurance. And they invested $1 billion in organic growth and $4 billion in M&A, but it never really took off. And in fact, it was consistently cited for making mistakes. And this was, the earlier days of AI. So after selling off a good chunk of the business in 2022 for only $1 billion, it was noted, and IBM cited that I guess we never really solved any unique pain points for any particular healthcare segment, and they didn't understand that their high price point was pretty prohibitive for a large portion of the healthcare industry. So the end of this story was not good, as I think I've shown here, losing billions of dollars. And a lot of this can be attributed to lack of identifying an initial good target market segment. Another example is the Amazon Fire Phone. This was a smartphone by Amazon. I don't know if anybody remember it. It boasted some cool features like object recognition and dynamic perspective for 3D effects. Maybe one of you bought it. I don't know. I didn't. But sadly, Amazon really tried to appeal to the broad smartphone user base and essentially trying to take on Apple and Samsung. And it turned out that from the consumer standpoint, the Fire Phone lacked really any differentiating features that resonated with any specific users. And it turns out some of the features weren't that great. Object recognition, people were kind of like, meh. The phone received poor reviews and sales were pretty terrible. And it was actually discontinued less than a year after launch. What that resulted in financially was $170 million write-off in just one quarter. And there were reports that about $83 million of phones were in inventory and they were like selling on eBay for like $1. So again, just another example of where not picking a good market segment to start can lead to pretty quick losses, especially when you're trying to go big, like an Amazon did here. Last example I'll cite is Segway, the personal transporter. Maybe some of you have ridden one. It was launched in 2001, and it was originally promoted as a revolutionary mode of transportation that could be used in a variety of settings. However, Segway really hadn't designed the product for a particular market need or a particular use case, which was kind of unfortunate. They had high production costs because it was such a novel piece of technology, which therefore translated into a high price. It encountered regulatory challenges. Cities, municipalities, they didn't want it on their streets or their sidewalks. That, you know, it seemed like a pretty unsafe thing. So the Segway ended up being viewed as a pretty much like a niche luxury item, never really gained wide adoption. And the company ended up changing hands not once, but 3 times between 2010 and 2015. And you know, always for a lower valuation. It was not a great outcome. So if we look at these 3 examples collectively, there are some common issues that do tend to lead to unprofitable segments. For example, maybe having that go big mentality and choosing a target customer base that's too wide, contains too many segments, maybe not performing enough customer research, you know, leading to not understanding their true needs and pain points, as well as, you know, how and where people want to buy. Misinterpreting customers' willingness to pay, like not analyzing that well, and therefore it often results in the price being too high, right? You didn't really understand, you know, that your price was too high. And then lastly, not examining the current market, not understanding the competition or regulatory landscape. So these are just some issues that can lead to unprofitable segments. Does anybody want to chime in with maybe another one? Because I'm sure there's more.
Well, price, you talked about price a little bit.
Yep. Yeah, if you misunderstood willingness to pay, that usually leads to a pricing.
Oh, okay.
You know,
okay.
Yeah, but you're right, exactly. I mean, straight up, just not having the right price, often too high. Sometimes it can be too low, and people think your product is, you know, not good enough, so they don't buy it because it's too low. That can definitely happen too.
I mean, I would just also add to that differentiation. You know, when I work at Chase, Chase had launched, when neobanks were becoming all the craze, they launched an online only bank. And they did a lot of research on it, and they launched it, and within a year they shut it down because it wasn't receiving much adoption.
Sure.
And you know, ultimately it was, you know, it wasn't that it was a too large a market or too, it was just like, well, what are you doing that's so different or innovative over just your existing bank and or the competitors out there?
Yep.
So I would say finding that sort of differentiation that's going to speak to the niche or the segment.
Yep. Straight up. Yeah, good one. All right, great. Well, let's go over now some, let's transition now. So we've sort of talked about what is segmentation, what is a segment, what makes an attractive segment, how to avoid unprofitable ones. So now I'd like to transition, start going over some guidelines, frameworks, some tools per se for performing market segmentation, so you can avoid the mistakes that, say, IBM and Amazon and Segway made. So generally speaking, you know, I like to break down 2 methods per se for segmenting a market, which we label as a priori and post hoc. So a priori segmentation is when you segment a market using pretty well accepted, easily identifiable classifications. So for example, if you're in a B2B market, you could segment based on things like industry codes, geography, the size of companies you want to target, or the types of customers the target companies serve. On the other hand, if the market is B2C, then you might segment based on things like gender, geography, age, ethnicity, or race. Now, post hoc segmentation is when you segment a market based on research. And ideally, this research is something that you and your team performed, or you commissioned it specifically for the segmentation, or you might be buying market research off the shelf. Either way, you're actually doing a little bit more work than just looking at the easily identifiable characteristics. So again, many of you on this call maybe have conducted research before, so there are a lot of things you can study and collect data on, and I've listed some of those here. Number one, you want to identify pain points. You want to maybe also uncover their product feature preferences and usage patterns. So again, there's a number of things you'd want to uncover and really find trends around doing that research, and that's again part of post hoc segmentation. Now, I know I threw out the fancy terms here, a priori and post hoc. So I really just want to offer a different, more simple way to classify these. And that's what we call structural segmentation versus needs-based segmentation. So as with a priori segmentation, the structural segmentation partitions a market based on firmographics or demographics. Whereas with needs-based segmentation, that can be done usually only after research has been performed, and customer aspects such as behavior and needs are then uncovered and known because they're not really easy to understand on the surface. So again, two segmentation methods that I've been talking about here. It may seem that the structural segmentation seems a bit easier than the needs-based segmentation, and that is absolutely true in my experience. I've seen teams do a lot of structural segmentation, which is certainly better than none. But structural segmentation, it does require less work. It tends to get everybody to an agreement point. But the thing is, if it's easy for you and your company to do, it's easy for the competition to do as well. So that's just another good reason to go the extra mile and do some research and try to get to needs-based segmentation, because then it's harder for your competition to really copy that. Okay. Just to bring these concepts to life, I'll provide a few examples of structural versus needs-based, and then maybe if somebody wants to throw out another one at the end, we can do that as well. So for one example would be like a structural segment could be, say, consumer food and bev manufacturers with a certain range of sales who sell through grocery retailers. Well, compare that to consumer food and beverage manufacturers that are building new processing and distribution facilities in high growth Asian countries and are having difficulty hiring employees, right? Very different. You can see how the needs-based segment is much more specific, and it actually targets a specific pain point. Another example would be female millennial nurses versus female millennial nurses looking to advance their careers and move into hospital administration. Again, more of a need, not just a demographic. And then my last example is going to be, the structural segment is just companies using SAP software, and the needs-based is more around companies hoping to identify their unnecessary seats in the software. So that, again, they have that pain point, they have a need. Again, we could go on, list a bunch of other examples. Does anybody, want to bring another one up that they've seen, like a more needs-based segment, like in their world? It's fine if we don't. That's fine. My point here is, again, discovering a needs-based segment can require more in-depth work than just defining a segment based on the structural aspects of it. And I'll also mention that when you're doing research to try to uncover the needs and those potential customers, it'll also tend to validate those 6 characteristics, right? You kind of go back to those 6 characteristics, and as you're doing research, you're sort of doing the circular, like, okay, is this big enough to matter? Is there a need? Will they respond to marketing? All of those things from the wheel of 6. So
Chad, I got one.
Yeah, good.
Really close to home. executives at B2B manufacturing companies that have very small or no marketing departments that need
Sure.
to figure out how to grow their business.
Yep. Yep.
And
That's a real needs-based segment there. I
now
agree.
structural segments is super easy to create lists. You know, you can go and do filters and Zoom info or mail
Yeah.
list providers, and it's super easy. You can get all kinds of details, and you can create a list. Needs-based segments, you can't just go create a list. You can't just go buy a list.
That's
It's
right.
Yeah. Are you going to get into how to find those people?
A little bit. How to find them? Yeah, I might. Yeah, let's definitely
Okay.
test me on that. Make sure I try to come back to that. I think there's a touch point in here on that.
Okay.
How would you think, Chad, about defining a whole new category? I'm thinking, I just was reading yesterday, the Adam Grant, Think Again book, and there's a lot of stuff on Mike Lazagardis versus the iPhone. And, in both cases, actually, it was the case at Apple as well. Jobs was really opposed to the idea of doing a all glass, all screen phone. He thought it was crazy, stupid. And there were people internally that wanted to push the idea, and it ended up being a new category. We famously had Ballmer saying
Yep.
nobody would ever buy that because there was no keyboard. But that's defining a new category. Is that really needs, or is it? It's certainly not. It's not a structural thing.
Yeah, I think there was probably a really good understanding of needs, honestly, because you could tie that technological innovation to problems it solved, right? Like it's fewer buttons to push, or I get a camera, I get a good camera and a good screen for my camera on my phone. Like these are things that I think Apple in particular was very good at sort of teasing out and understanding based on user observation and really understanding what a cutting edge piece of technology could bring to the table in terms of solving needs or solving problems. I'm not familiar with that particular use case or that story. I didn't know that about how Jobs didn't think a touchscreen phone would fly. But I do think there's often there's problem based and needs based analysis going on when things like that are being innovated, right? I mean, I think any pitch, especially at a company as big as Apple, there has to be some tie to problems, some tie to needs, and then again, the segment wheel. Like, is it big enough to matter? Yeah, a lot of people have phones. Can we reach these people by our marketing? Yes, we're Apple. We know how to reach people. They all have our iPods right now. Things like that. So that's a nice
Yeah.
example though, where
Well, I'm just thinking
it's
as a marketing person, I'm very segmentation oriented, but I think of a lot of cases where it was really seat of the pants.
sure.
And it's 2020 hindsight that it worked,
Yeah, well, I mean, luck plays a role in all of our lives, so sometimes,
Yeah.
we do get lucky.
Okay, go
All
ahead. I'm
right.
sorry.
So yeah, no, this is great. Love the engagement. So we've covered the two methods of segmentation. I want to continue now and provide some thoughts on identifying needs-based segments, because that's really, the important way of segmenting. So I'm going to break this into three pillars. The first pillar, which I've alluded to already, is to conduct research, and particularly primary research. This is the act of talking to customers, polling them, and the common ways of doing this, at least three pretty common ways, are things like focus groups, in-depth interviews, and surveys. I'm not gonna present here on how to do those things. I think people have done them, or there's a whole other set of training to how to perform these particular tasks and these projects. But I will highlight a couple of things about conducting customer research in the context of market segmentation. First, it's important to define the people and the types of companies that you want to include in these activities, whether it's a focus group or a survey. For example, for B2C research, you might define like their age groups, geographies, existing purchasing patterns. For B2B, it would be certainly firmographics, a person's role or seniority at the company. And again, it could be product usage information as well. The point is that you want to do research on a group of people that share those common characteristics so that you can determine whether they have similar needs, whether they have similar pain points. Because once you figure out that they do, then you realize, okay, it's starting to mean like, yeah, that's a segment that's big enough to matter. There's a willingness to pay. They're going to respond to this product and offer that solves their pain point. Also, you should know like when to use each of these methods. And I've used all three of them, and they're not interchangeable per se. I think a common way is to sequence them if you have, again, the time and the budget. So a lot of times I see research starting with focus groups that generates some initial insights and uncovers potential common themes or pain points. And then that leads to more in-depth interviews, well, one-on-one. So you can probe deeper with particular individuals. And then after that, you might do a broader survey where you can get a lot of, you can really increase the number of respondents with like an online survey or a phone survey to really generate a large volume of data and try to quantify that prevalence or intensity of particular need. There are certainly other considerations and a lot of material that could be explained about, again, these three research methods, and we don't have time for that. But if anyone's interested in chatting more about these, I'll have my email at the end or put your contact information in the chat. We can follow up and have a conversation because I've done focus groups. I've mostly done in-depth interviews and surveys. I've only done a few focus groups, but that is something that I do like to do. All right, the second pillar for getting to needs-based segments is analyzing your existing customer data. And existing customer data falls into a handful of buckets. It can be like customer reviews of your product. It can be customer service calls and just talking to customer service reps who are interacting with customers. Those data sources, they'll likely unveil some pain points as well as some needs. Additionally, depending on the product or service being offered, just looking at your website traffic patterns, that can reveal what content is resonating, which could help tease out needs. Or if you're a SaaS application, just looking at the analytics, where are people using the product? Where is it not being used? Where are they getting, where are we hearing about errors? So just analyzing that data is a good use of, a good way to find a need. And then the last one is sales data. That's the last one I'm listing here today. You can use this to find patterns in customer purchases and possibly reveal those segments where there's distinct buying habits or distinct needs. And again, these are just some sources of data, and every company is going to have its own sources. But again, in my experience, the customer data is a great place to find insights for your market segmentation efforts. So the third pillar for defining needs-based segments is uncovering the why behind customer behavior. And this means really grasping what problems they're trying to solve, what goals they're looking to achieve, what motivates them, really getting at the root cause of their intent to purchase or the problems they're having. So, how do you get to this why information? Well, for one, when you're defining the questions for your focus group or your interviews, you need to have questions around that try to get at that. You need to probe to make sure you're, getting to that level of understanding. That same as if you're looking through customer reviews, looking at customer data, right? Or transcripts of support calls. You want to be hunting for those reasons why. And it may not show up that often, but you find like maybe one or two and you're like, oh yeah, that's why this is a product for them, or that's why they're having this problem, and I think we can solve it. In some ways, this go for why is really a mindset, and I think a lot of us on this call probably have that. We're in marketing, we're curious, we want to know why they're buying, we want to know what their problems are. But again, it's really imperative to have that mindset and to go after the why when you're trying to identify the needs-based segments. Okay, so just to summarize the three pillars, and then we'll move on. Again, it's performing customer research, analyzing customer data, and understanding the why. So those three pillars that I said, are really necessary to, define and derive needs-based segments. I'll just pause here to see if there's any questions in chat or if anybody wants to shout out a question before we get to the next section of the presentation. All right, we'll keep going, clicking along. Okay, so let's say you and the team, you've started working on segmentation, you're defining segments, you're using the 6 characteristics, you're making a list of potential segments, and you're doing research, you're doing all these things. At some point in that process, could be early, could be middle, could be near the end, you probably have to narrow down your list of segments because you're not going to have all the resources to either study them all or market to them all. And as the goal of segmentation, states, you need to focus. You need to focus your efforts, focus your resources, and target probably just a few. So what I'm going to share now is a framework I've used to help really cull the field of segments from many to few, and then outline some steps that teams can take to conduct prioritization workshops. So the framework I've used in the past really prescribes looking at segments through 3 different lenses. The first lens reveals segments that have a high need for the product or service, again, needs-based segmentation. The second lens reveals segments that have favorable characteristics, and I'll explain this in a second. And then the third lens reveals segments that have favorable competitive dynamics. So if you evaluate your segments using each of these 3 lenses, then logically the most attractive segments are the ones that look appealing through all 3 lenses. So it's essentially that middle intersection of the Venn diagram. So again, I want to come back and explain each of these lenses in a little detail so I'm clear on what I mean here. So in looking at segments through the high need for product lens, you're figuring out which segments' needs align best to your product or your proposed product. You'll likely find multiple market segments that need your product, but some segments might have a more intense need than other segments. When looking at segments through the competitive lens, you're determining which segments offer the best competitive landscape for your product, where your chances of winning are really the best. You do need to take competition into account to make sure you're making the bets that will pay off. Again, Amazon Fire maybe didn't consider how strong their competition was with Apple and Samsung, and that definitely led to an unprofitable outcome. And then lastly, when looking at segments through the characteristics lens, you're really focusing in on which segments line up best to the 6 characteristics of a segment. Again, that wheel of the characteristics. Again, you'd be asking things like, is this identifiable? Is it big enough to matter? But you'll also be asking, how many potential customers are there in this segment versus others? So maybe maybe you want to go after manufacturers that are automotive or manufacturers that are aerospace. Well, which segment's bigger? Maybe that makes a difference, right? And also market growth, right? So maybe the automotive sector is growing at 3% a year, but aerospace is growing at 10%, and maybe that makes it more attractive. Again, the characteristics can be a lot of different variables, just depending on where you're targeting or what type of segments you're defining. So this framework hopefully is fairly simple to comprehend. Again, just 3 lenses. But getting to the intersection of these 3 lenses is often not very light work in my experience. As we've covered earlier, it requires some research. You got to analyze data. And then this effort of comparing segments against one another to land on those that are most attractive. And to close this out, I'm going to go through what I like to call a scorecard. And that helps teams sort of list and rate and rank segments, often based on criteria from these 3 lenses. So here's just then some instructions on how to build a scorecard. Again, you might have seen these before if you've done any sort of prioritization, like product roadmap prioritization or feature prioritization, things like that. But I'll go through this quickly, and then we'll probably be done, almost done, and then ready for some final questions. So to go through the scorecard. So you first you create the list of segments you want to evaluate against each other. This might be, again, it could be vertical industries, it could be consumer types, or it could be your list of needs-based segments. Maybe you've identified those needs-based segments, but you haven't figured out which ones to prioritize yet. Next, you're going to define criteria upon which to evaluate each segment. And again, these criteria could be things like the strength of various needs in that particular segment, the level of competition. Again, it could be size, growth rate of the segment, things like that. But I call those sort of the criteria. Next, you define scoring scales, meaning the possible range of scores you would give for a segment when evaluating it on a specific criteria. Now, in this example, I sort of put 0, 1, and 2. 0 is the lowest, 2 is the highest. That keeps things pretty simple. I've seen other scales used. But again, to keep it simple, just kind of 0, 1, 2 often works just fine. And then this isn't necessary, but sometimes I like to define weights for each criteria as well to show their relative importance to one another. In other words, some criteria might be more important to your business than others. So using weights can help depict that. And just as a tip, a common way to assign weights is to constrain the weights to add up to like 10 or 100. So you're sort of forced to make decisions on which criteria is more important than another. So then once you have that scorecard defined and constructed, you and your team can discuss how to score each segment against each criteria. So you go down and say, this is a 1, this is a 2, this is a 1, this is a 0. This is a great team exercise. It brings multiple points of view to the table, allows multiple voices to be heard. Typically, I see like 3 to 6 people is a pretty good workshop number. More than that, it gets a little harder to manage. And you can do these virtually or in person. Both, I think, work fine. But you certainly want to include the right people on your team that are familiar with the segmentation exercise you're going through, familiar with the customers, familiar with research that you might have performed. So you want to, build that group accordingly. And then at the end, once you've done all the unique scoring of say the 0, 1, 2s, you just do some math in your workbook, a spreadsheet, to total up the score for each segment, and then you rank them based on, in this case, 2 is the highest, that would be the most attractive, and 1 and 0 is the lowest score. So you just sum up all these factors and you'd find the segment with the highest overall score. That's the most attractive. So this is a way to try to, take some guesswork out of it, take a little less of, a little less feel out of it and put a little bit more quantitative analysis to it. So just a few more considerations for these scorecards and workshops, and then we'll wrap up. Again, it's important, like I said, to let research guide the criteria you're putting in the scorecard. I think that goes, it's pretty consistent with what I'm saying here. Research should be done to help identify the segments and to drive these criteria. Also, I think it's helpful to whittle the list of segments you're evaluating to a smaller list as soon as you can, like in your process. Narrow, like keep whittling. And this allows you to focus, your research, allow you to score only the segments that are most likely to matter. So I again think, making it as simple and narrow as possible can be a good thing. You may find it easiest to separate scorecards by workshop and your workshops by lens. So meaning you could develop a needs-based scorecard, a competitive landscape scorecard, and a characteristic scorecard. That might help simplify things. And then when you see the analysis of all 3, you might see one segment that's ranked really high in all 3. And that would be where that bullseye is. From a team workshop standpoint, I like to try to have my participants do the work in advance. So come prepared. Don't come to the workshop not having seen the matrix and not really understanding what we're doing. Maybe collect all the data in advance and then just talk about where there's differences. It can be a little unruly if everybody just comes and shows and starts, saying 0, 0, 1, 1, 2. It'd be nice to have some of that already collected. And then lastly, teams should use the scorecards to identify where your knowledge of segments is weakest. This often is a byproduct of doing these scorecards. Like you're going to be going through and scoring, and you're going to realize, I don't know if we've got enough data to really score that well. Maybe we need to either punt that criteria or at least do more research until we can really score it well. So I see that happening a lot too. Again, a lot more can be said on all of these topics, but particularly with scorecards, I'm happy to share some examples. So if you want to email me sometime down the road, I'm happy to send you a couple of examples so that you can really, take those as templates and put them into action in your life. All right, so reached the end here, which is great. We'll have a few more minutes for questions. So let me just conclude with the key points that I hope I made, and hopefully you'll agree you've learned and picked up these things today. We started with the fact that segmentation is a process for dividing customers into groups that share some things in common. Segmentation can be a one-time project. It should be a mindset. It should be something that you're constantly on top of, and looking for niche segments. Whether it might, it could be, the rural yoga instructors in Illinois. Maybe that's a niche segment that you're wondering, should we target it or not? And that's, where you're at. Second, I shared the examples of some pretty big failures due to lack of identifying attractive segments. Hopefully those case studies impressed upon you those pitfalls of not performing market segmentation. We reviewed the difference between structural segmentation and needs-based segmentation, and the fact that needs-based segments are really more likely to lead to better sales and profits. For one reason, it's harder for the competition to beat you when you're really understanding the needs in your segments. Fourth, I tried to convey that segmentation is a combination of research, data analysis, and prioritization. The only way to uncover needs-based segments is through knowing your customers. And you need to know them by asking them questions, looking at their feedback to you, and understanding the data. And then lastly, we ended with the 3 lenses framework for evaluating segments, with the lenses being, high needs, favorable competitive dynamics, and favorable segment characteristics. Evaluating segments through each lens can merit a tool like a scorecard, and I showed you an example of that. And again, I think that's often best completed by a small team in 1 or more workshops. So hopefully you learned a few things today. That's all I have. Thanks again, Dennis and the Bay Area Content Marketing Meetup Group for inviting me to present and hosting this. And thanks all of you for attending and sharing your input, answering my quiz, and having a good engaging topic here. So thanks again. We got a few more minutes for questions. So
yeah, I think we have time for one question. And thank you for the presentation, Chad. Anyone have a question? Bet. So I have one, a really basic one, Chad. So yeah. I would imagine this process of segmentation is performed when you take a new product to market or take an existing product and try to find a more targeted customer base. What are some of the job titles of the people who are doing this activity in organizations?
I think product manager, product marketing manager. A lot of the work I do is in B2B software. Those are my clients. So those are the titles or the roles I've seen. I think again, it often stems from either product or marketing in a B2B setting. In B2C, it's definitely marketing. Sure. I haven't worked in B2C as much, and maybe as a lot of you on the call, but I think it's definitely marketing that does segmentation. And so that could be brand manager, it could be market, go-to-market manager, things like that, titles like that.
Sounds good. There's an interesting question in the chat from Chris. How do you talk a CEO down from a bad segment hobby horse? My example was a CEO going too broad with too big competitors because he wanted to be a unicorn.
Yeah, I think the worksheet approach can help. Like, okay, CEO, let's break down, the segments. Let's break down the criteria. What makes an attractive segment? And again, if you go through that exercise and you sort of break it down into those finer components, you can sort of lead that horse to water. Like, oh, yeah, now that I'm thinking about like what makes something attractive and whether that segment or this segment is or isn't, I can maybe see that, either more analysis is needed, or yeah, we're not thinking about it hard enough when we're just, if we haven't really tore it down to its core components. So I've definitely seen that help. sometimes you can't, even with that sort of analysis, you can't convince the person who, holds the purse strings, or, is beholden to the shareholders to change their mind. But at least you can try with some of that sort of data, that more analytical approach.
Makes sense. All right, and with that, I think we're out of time. Hold on a second, Chad. I'm sorry, Chris. Oh, Chris says thanks. Thanks everyone for joining. Chad, thanks for presenting, and we hope to see you all on our next meetup.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks everyone. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.